Caught between a rock and a hard place, public sector unions have had to swallow their pride and accept the government's final wage offer. Could it be a turning point in the relations between the state and its employees? We hear from the ministry in charge and from 3 of the unions affected. And later on in the program, we look at the implications of the cyber attack that has hit Transnet, throwing the country's ports into disarray and bringing a lot of business to a halt. Could it have been prevented? The Watchdog starts now. It's done. The country's 1.2 million civil servants will receive a 1.5 percentage point increase in and monthly cash payments of between 1,200 Rand and 1,695 Rand a month for a year starting from now. This as public sector unions representing 60% of the workforce have signed an agreement with the state accepting the wage deal.
Relief for FEDUSA-affiliated public sector unions as a new wage deal is reached following months of tough negotiations with government.
When we moved from the 0%, and we must acknowledge the big difference between 0% and where we've ended up, where we have a bonus that will see that all levels from level 1 to 12 will receive at least 1,000 Rand after tax. And of course the 1.5%, which is essentially our pay progression, but paid to everybody. When we see how far we've come to reach that point, we've got to acknowledge that our negotiators have done us proud and have done well.
The signing of the agreement by the Public Servants Association yesterday sealed the deal.
We know that there is no housing in this particular agreement. We know that there is no medical aid in this agreement. So the workers themselves, they know that for 2 years, electricity has increased by 15%. We have seen in April, petrol increased by 1 Rand. All these conditions made to this conclusion that we need something to keep on going with our lives. And something that keeps members going on with their lives is 1,000 Rand monthly.
COSATU public sector unions represent the majority of civil servants in the country, but only the Teachers Union SATU and the Nursing Union DINOSA have signed the new agreement. The rest have refused to sign, describing government's offer as an insult to the workers. But SATU General Secretary Mokoena Maluleke has downplayed the division.
In the stable of COSATU, we know that we are not shocked, we are not surprised, because I think around 2005 we didn't sign, and the other unions signed. So, and we have been working together because we understand that these are structural positions, and therefore we respect the autonomy and the independence of each union. We are going to be working together in the JMC. We respect their decision not to accept, as the same way that they respect our decision to have accepted.
The Minister of Public Service Administration, Senzo Mchunu, has praised the leaders of the unions that have come on board, saying they have shown good leadership and negotiated with the interests of the civil servants and the country's citizens at heart. Mbongeni Mutwa, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, let's welcome our first guest, the Deputy Minister of Public Service and Administration, Sindisiwe Chikunga. Good evening, Deputy Minister. Thanks very much for your time. You heard there the workers not mincing their words. This is an insult.
Good evening, Vuyo, and good evening to your viewers. Let me thank you for allowing us to participate in this program. I don't think it is an insult. We look at that which the country can afford, and with all the limitations that are there, but we still felt that our public service or public servants should get something this time around, despite the difficulties that the country is the country is facing, the constraints and the challenges that are there, and the limitations. But we still feel that our public servants should get something, hence the agreement that was signed by the public servants, public unions.
You're not twisting their arms because really there's very little that they can do.
It's not about twisting the arm. We remember we were negotiating. It took some time. We put different offers on the table. Many were rejected, and this last offer was also put on the table, and the unions have therefore agreed with government, which is the employer. And we really want to appreciate that. We are aware of the limitations. However, there are challenges that the country is facing that are real, that can actually be seen by anyone. And yet we still feel that the public service do qualify to get something. Under the circumstances, we really want to thank them for coming to the party and taking into account the realities that the country is facing.
Well, I mean, they're arguing that if you look at the cost of living, the numbers are there for everybody to see, and not only do you not care about that? What you've also done as the employer has been to go out there, blackmail the workers, and make it sound like the only thing that could have been done to get the money, or at least move as close as possible to what they wanted, was for the government to go and borrow. And they're not convinced that that was the only option left for government. There was just a lack of willingness on the part of government to actually do whatever was possible.
In fact, it's not like the government was not willing. Like I've said, we put on the table different offers. Initially, it was that there is no money. And then we went ahead to say, this is the legal amount that we can give. And initially, it was 1.5 only percent. And ultimately, it was this top-up, which, of course, does not add on to the baseline. The fact of the matter is that we went to negotiations and put on the table the situation that the country is facing, the difficulties, the constraints, the limitations. And we said this is what the government can or cannot afford. And we negotiated with our unions. And in acknowledging and realizing the challenges that the country is facing, they then said, then nothing we can therefore agree on this one. It's not a matter of blackmailing anyone. We appreciate the work that our public servants are doing. Remember, we are going through the pandemic, and our public servants are in the forefront of ensuring that people do not contract the virus, that the pandemic does not affect everybody and therefore kill everybody. And they are in the forefront of that. If it was according to that, we would have given them a lot of money. But it is also real that nobody budgeted for this pandemic. I'm just making an example. Nobody budgeted for that. And therefore, the resources are not in abundance. And they acknowledge that because we were very fair and open to our unions during our negotiations to say, this is the path. And this is what government has, and this is what government can or cannot afford. And it is in that spirit that we really want to appreciate and to thank the unions for acknowledging, but also for taking into account the challenges that the country is facing, and therefore being very patriotic and accepting the offer that is on the table.
Of course, I'm sure you're aware, because this has been said before, that as much as people like you may be speaking the way you are speaking, thanking them, but also insisting that government appreciates the effort that a lot of, in particular, frontline workers, in the health sector who are putting life and limb at stake to really protect the rest of us. But coming as this agreement does on the back of you reneging, on the last part of an agreement you signed with the workers, it becomes difficult for them to believe what you're saying and to trust you.
Even on with that one, Vuyo, it's not a question of reneging, but I think that should actually make you appreciate the difficulties that we faced when we faced as government, but even as labor unions when we started to negotiate for this cycle. That we went to negotiations limping, as a matter of fact. However, we appreciate the fact that our trade unions, South Africans, remember they too are South Africans, have acknowledged the fact that even with the last leg, it was not like somebody just did not want to, but it was the reality of the situation in the country. And it still is the reality of the financial situation of the country as we speak here today. And it is in that spirit that we said, despite all the difficulties, but let's probably get something, no matter how little it is, but let's get something to give to our public servants and the unions, because we put everything on the table before our unions and said this is the situation in the country in terms of finances, and this is what we can or we cannot afford, and on the basis of that, fair negotiations. The government, the union said, we're not happy, however, we do acknowledge and realize, and therefore they signed. So we now have an agreement, I must say, and we really want to thank our labor unions, but we also want to thank our public servants who will get this legal part. Of course, we believe that it's not the same as nothing. And we want to thank them for that. But we also want to thank them for the work that they are doing for the state, but the work that they are doing for the public in the Republic of South Africa. Some people will always refer to our public servants as government servants. They are public servants. They work for the public. And in that regard, everybody in South Africa can actually use public services. And whether you're a public servant, whether you are rich or poor, and they cater for everybody, for those that are regarded as the nobodies to those that are regarded as the somebodies. Our public servants do cater for them and take care of them, and we thank them for that. And it's not only nurses and, yes, health workers, but it's the police, South African Police Service members, it's the defense members, it's correctional, it's those that are in frontline offices, in Department of Home Affairs, and so on. That every day will meet people who are contacts, and they come to get that certificate, and they don't know that they actually have been in contact with infected people. They come to them. We thank them and we appreciate the work that they are doing. But of course, we are facing some difficulties, and the pandemic has exacerbated the situation that already was dire, and it has actually created more challenges for us. I don't want to talk about what happened last week, but I'm talking about the pandemic and the situation that the country finds itself in.
That's what we're going to leave it. Thanks very much for your time this evening, Deputy Minister of Public Service and Administration, Sindisiwe Chikunga. After the break, we'll talk to the affected unions about this agreement. Don't go away. Welcome back. This is the Watchdog. Caught between a rock and a hard place, public sector unions have had to swallow their pride and accept the government's final wage offer. Could it be a turning point in relations between the state and its employees? Well, we hear from the unions that have been affected, and we're joined right now by the NEHAWU's first Deputy President, Mike Shingange, and by Basil Manuel, who is the CEO of NAPTOSA. Good evening to both of you gentlemen, and thank you so much for your time. I don't know if you listened to what the Deputy Minister of Public Service and Administration earlier. Every second sentence had a thank you to our public servants, saying they are not undermining you at all, but circumstances have forced them them to go as far as they have gone. If it was according to them, they would have offered you a lot more because they love you so very much and they appreciate the work that you have been doing. Basil Manuel?
Good evening. Well, no, I didn't listen to the speech. However, look, the sentiments are there. But we must understand that public servants, whilst we may have signed, and we are one of the parties that signed and accepted, we are not declaring that this was the best deal. We are not even saying that we're satisfied. But what we are saying is that we've reached the end of the road. We've committed ourselves to this, and we've also acknowledged all the other things around us that are happening. And that is why we are here. But it's not an indication that this is what we will be accepting going ahead.
Mike Shigange, you haven't signed.
Yes, we have not signed. Maybe to start with your question, Mike says we might not have listened to everything, but its sentiment is not a new sentiment, and it's something that we have always rejected, that the public service don't sign up to work for the public service, only to be paid through lip service of saying thank you. A demonstrable action need to be there in order for workers to believe that their employer cares for them, particularly during this time that these employees are the ones that are at the forefront of trying to save the nation out of this pandemic. You will know that the public health sector, since the beginning of the pandemic, and the police, who have not been having lucky to be on the lockdown just like every other person has been paying. One of the things that they've been demanding was at least an incentive, a compensation for working during a dangerous period when everybody else was afraid to open a door and go outside. But these workers were forced to be crammed in the public transport, to go to the public workplaces, and contracting and die. To date, we've got fewer public health workers today because they've died in the line of duty. We've got few police today because they've died in the line of duty. Surely, thank you, it's not enough. Not when you are in the period where you have workers that for the second year running have not received the salary increase, let alone the compensation for the danger and risking their life in trying to defend the nation. So, yes, we have not signed, not only because of that, but we reject this emotional blackmail and insult of saying thank you, and it ends there.
Let's bring in SADTU's Deputy General Secretary, Nkosana Tolopu. Mr. Tolopu, you guys have signed even though you were not happy with the deal.
Good evening, Vuyo. Good evening to the President, Deputy President of COSATU, and good evening to Comrade Basil and to your viewers. Look, Vuyo, it's not uncommon that you will have in the public service a question of some unions signing and others not signing. In 2007 collective agreement, SADTU did not sign that collective agreement. And other unions respected us for taking a decision in 2017 for not signing that collective agreement. Similarly, in 2010, we did not sign a collective agreement. All other unions signed, SADTU did not sign. So again, at that time, unions respected our autonomy, our independence. They respected the views of the SADTU members, and they signed, and the collective agreement was binding for all of us. So I'm saying it should not be that in 2021, an impression gets created that is for the first time that in the public service we'll have a situation of some unions signing and others not signing. It is not a sign of disunity. We are not divided. It is just that at this time, our mandates don't seem to be the same, and therefore those who would have signed ought to be respected just like those who did not sign ought to be respected. When it comes to our union, we got mandate from our SADTU members through many means, through surveys that we conducted, through executive structures that we had, up to the National Executive Committee meeting that we had. A clear mandate from our members was that, look, this is not the best of deals that you can get. But under the circumstances where you need some disposable income, under these difficult conditions that the workers find themselves, when they did not get an increment in 2020, when they started on negotiations with a zero-based budget, for almost a month, government stayed on a zero-based budget. We were able to push them from that zero-based budget to 27 billion rand today, plus 1.5 that they will get. That would mean that many other workers will then benefit beyond those who usually get the 1.5. This year we succeeded to open the window for all public servants to be able to get the 1.5. And also we achieved to put government into a one-term agreement, something that we wanted for all these years. At least we achieved this year, to have to lock them into a one-term agreement, unlike they would have done in previous cases where they did not want us to get into one-term agreement. So we are saying, yes, indeed, it's not the best, but under these circumstances, disposable income. And in fact, some workers in the public service will get far more than what we demanded initially, even as unions.
Okay.
You must remember we started our demands from CPI plus 4%, which in fact came to 7%. But the lowest earning workers in the public service will in actual fact get 11%, far more than almost 4% above the demand that we put when we started our negotiations.
Mm-hmm.
If we would have gone to the question of us accepting, say, the 7%, many of those workers now who would be receiving this 11%, this 1,000 rand, would have received something far lesser disposable income, up to 200 rand, 300 rand. We have been able to look at the plight of the low-earning workers and have been able to push them. Now they will be getting a 4% above our demand, our initial demand of 4%. So I'm saying it's something that we need to appreciate. It did not come from heaven. It came because of our effort and the work of the negotiators at the level of the PSCPC.
Okay, now most of us, get to really dabble in this, when there's a deadlock, or when a deal, is or isn't signed. Basil, one notes that, affiliates of FEDUSA, for example, all of them signed, which is not the case, for example, with COSATU-affiliated unions. And I note the point that Nkosana Dolopi just made, that it's not the first time, nor will it be the last. Just for our understanding, those of us who are not intimately involved with these processes, do you mobilize, or do you try to persuade one another so that as workers you present a position that is as close as possible to a common one? How do you go about when you realize that you can still nudge one another towards a particular position or point? Do you do that, and up to what point? If so, up to what point?
Well, at first, let's debunk the myth that everybody moves in unison. It doesn't, because we all serve different constituencies.
Okay.
And we've got to listen to what those constituencies say. NAPTOSA, for example, as a member of FEDUSA, we got a mandate early. But on the other hand, the PSA was very different. It got a mandate very, very long after the NAPTOSA mandate. And whilst we meet together and we discuss and we try and convince one another, we've also got to respect that we are individual organizations, we are independent organizations, we have our own cultures, but also at the same time we have we serve a constituency that may be very different one to the other. And you've got to consider that. And we've got to respect that even the culture of getting mandates is different. So, yes, we do talk amongst one another. Yes, we do try and convince and bring one another or teams closer together. It doesn't always work as well as it sounds now. But at the end of the day, we are differing on issues. We're not differing as the organizations. We're not differing as the people representing. We're still a united group, even though we may have different mandates, because our people place different importance on different issues.
Mike Chingange, couldn't you and and SATU and everyone else who belongs to the COSATU family have spent perhaps a lot more time trying to find one another before things hit a boiling point?
Well, we have. In fact, let me start by agreeing with Comrade Kosana that for us as Nihao, it doesn't arise the question that this boils down to divisions in COSATU, or it doesn't arise the fact that it's like we have seen a ghost that some unions did not sign today.
Maybe before you even finish that, because I don't think, I mean, everyone, I'm not saying there aren't people who are moving from that premise, but I don't think anyone is moving from a premise that says, you know, oh, yeah, there are divisions within COSATU. But some people are raising very subtle points about the importance of unity in action, where everyone works, so even those who may be, you know, more advantaged than others, who may be bargaining from a position of relative strength, it is important to take everyone on board. And because you belong to the same family, in this instance, COSATU, it would have been easier for you to find one another, one would imagine, than perhaps would have been the case for you to find your colleagues and comrades in the PSA or in FEDUSA. I think that's really the point that a lot of people are making.
Yes, that's where I was coming at, Putfuyo, that to start with, those that think that we are moving from the point of view that there is a division. I'm saying it is not the first time, as Comrade Tolobi said, that one or other unions will not have signed an agreement, because much as we belong to one family, you must remember that COSATU doesn't get into the bargaining council and negotiate for its members. It coordinates the unity and the strength of its affiliates. It is individual affiliates and collectively that gets into the bargaining council, informed by the demands and the needs of their constituencies. That varies from sector to sector. And that's what informs, at the end of the day, the kind and the nature of demands that you put on the table when you go to negotiate, but also at what point you must move and sign or not sign, informed by what it is that you must have been able to achieve. For instance, we speak now about what looks like it's a more than 4% above the inflation. Every time, as now, when we go to the negotiations, we always speak about a sliding scale. That takes the lowest paid worker to get the highest percentage. In this instance, everybody else is going to get the 1,000 rand, irrespective of whether you're at level 12 or you're at level 1. In fact, the current sliding scale as it stands now, the highest paid worker, it gets up to 1,600 and something, and then the lowest paid gets the 1,000. So it's not a sliding scale that Nihao believes it in the first instance. Secondly, it's just not about the question of the percentage which has been branded in public that is an increase, while in fact there's always been a budgeted for that. We're going to get it as a pay progression every year. We didn't go to these negotiations this time around, Portfolio, with a 1.5% demand on the table. There was no offer of the 1.5% from the employer, because that was already been set aside as 8 billion that always get in there. So this thing that says we've got a 1.5 salary increase, it's actually a misnomer. It's not true. Yes, it has been extended to those who otherwise would not have qualified to, but what does that mean? That means that we have killed the pay progression this year. The principle of the pay progression as we know it is dead. How are we going to reinstate it next year when actually the employer is going to want to proceed on the basis of what we have done this year? Thirdly, the House members said that the current form of the agreement or offer, there's no way that Nihao must put its signature there. When you want us to proceed for getting that, we want to sign a resolution 1 of 2021, as if there's no resolution 1 of 2018. That on the last leg of it, the employer just went out and took us to court just like that. And then today, there's no talk about that. We must proceed as if everything is normal. We want to believe that this employer will implement Resolution 1 of 2021 when they've reneged on Resolution 1 of 2018 without any explanation, where there was a clearly binding agreement. Here we're talking about a gratuity. We're talking about a gratuity which plunges us as workers into the same precarious sector workers that are working in the hospitality industries, that they don't have the basic salary. In fact, they only rely on a team. If next year, as it says in this agreement, this thing will wait for a new agreement, it means as unions, at least in the view of Nihao, we have surrendered the principle of collective agreement as we know it, or of negotiations as we know it. In other words, we are going to go into the negotiations against next year, begging that there must be gratuity again, because we now have this one. And gratuity, by the way, as we know, even if you have signed it, it's not something that's compulsory. Lastly, it is unfair that in 2021 workers must be emotionally blackmailed to consider as if this problem and this attitude of the state that it's giving to its employees, it started because we've got an economic difficulty brought about by coronavirus. It's not true. This is an austerity ideological posture of our state that started long before there was coronavirus. Even at a time when the employer walked away from a collective agreement, there was no coronavirus at that time. So therefore, to say that we must consider the situation as is now, as if the austerity measure and the posturing of the national treasury against the public sector wage bill and the savings that they've always wanted to save, as if it started in 2020, it didn't. This is what Nyao is rejecting. Nyao is rejecting the celebratory and the victory of the state to ostracize and cut the budget of the public servants and turn the public servants into the modern state of today.
Mr. Tolope, you seem to be pinning a lot of hope, in the fact that this is a one-term agreement. But on the back of what Mr. Shingange has just raised about what this means, that it is death to pay a progression, how do you justify your like pinning your hopes around the fact that this is just for this agreement goes only for this short period?
Let me start this way. Vuyo, remember, I'm also talking to my president of COSATU here. But let me start to say, Vuyo, that 1,000 rand that public servants will be getting, the value of 1,000 rand for public servants will be different. 1,000 rand for the lowest earning public servant amounts to 11%, whereas 1,000 rand for the highest earning official in government amounts to 3%. So when we talk about sliding scale, in percentage terms, like we always do when we negotiate in the public service, we always translate whatever we do into percentages. So there is sliding scale, because even though in rands and cent terms it will translate into 1,000 rand, but in percentage terms it is different. It will reflect from 10% downwards, from the 10% the lowest earning officials up to the lowest being 3% for the highest earning level. So we have achieved the objective of a sliding scale. That's just one point I wanted to make. Secondly, around the 1.5, like the president is saying, ordinarily, only a few public servants would have achieved or would have accessed the 1.5%. He is correct to say we have secured the 1.5% a long time ago. But what is different now, what we have achieved during this round of negotiation was to open the window for many other public servants to be able to access the 1.5%. Firstly, there are those public servants that we refer to as public servants who are on personal notice, who ordinarily would not have received the 1.5%. But this time we've opened the window, they will also be able to access the 1.5%. Secondly, usually government budget a certain percentage for public servants to get the 1.5%. But this time we have opened the window for all public servants to be able to earn the 1.5%. So there is a slight difference that we would have achieved because of this thing here. I agree with the president to say that we are fighting austerity measures. We hate austerity measures, and we are on one as COSATU around that Treasury now seems to have placed themselves at a position to try to make sure that they cut on all the gains that would have secured over a long period of time. But what we are saying as such is that these things are not events. Negotiations and improving the conditions of service of workers, of the public servants, are not an event. They would not have been secured over this round of negotiations alone. If Aluta continues, the struggle continues, we will continue to fight to improve the conditions of workers. But when we secure something that we think at a particular time is good, we then grab it and then use it, and then the next battle starts to fight for securing more benefits for the workers. So this round of negotiations was not an alpha or an omega. It was not the start and the beginning and the start of it. We will continue to fight to improve the conditions of workers in the public service.
Basil Manuel, what are you taking away from this round of negotiations, and coming as it does on the back of something Mike Shingang went to great lengths talking about earlier, which was the agreement that the government reneged on. What are your takeaways from this particular round? And going into the future, how do you think it's going to shape relations between the state and its employees?
Let me start with the 2018 agreement, the last leg that hasn't been implemented. The fact that we haven't let it slide, the fact that we are in court, as all of us sitting around this table now, as well as many of the other unions in the public service, says that we will hold the employer to account. We will not allow people to treat collective bargaining with disdain. We walk away from this particular year not thinking for a minute that 2018 has been lost. On the 24th of August, we will be in the Concourt, and we are all confident. We won't be there if we weren't confident of success. And of course, we are there fighting for collective bargaining, not so much about the salary, it's about protecting the right to collective bargaining. And we come to 2021 and 2022. That is why 2022 will see us going back. Dolopi has mentioned it's a one-year agreement. We have an obligation to ensure that we get ready and we go back and we fight, because we can't give up the gains that we have made. But we walk away from 2021 with the thought that says, the employer came intent on giving nothing. It made it very clear. We had pronouncements long before bargaining even started, 0%. The fact that we pushed the employer from 0% to where we are now, with a sliding scale, from the poorest to those highest earners, with the poorest getting the highest percentage. And if you look at the totality that is achieved, it has moved the employer. The downside is no, it is not pensionable, which is what we would have wanted. That was first prize. But we've also had to collect ourselves and look at the situation we are in. But we can't constantly be the ones that have to give up. Mike is correct when he said, the thank yous are not enough. You've got to show us greater gratitude. Look at what we have done as the public service. And I speak for teachers and education workers, and I'm telling you, they've made huge sacrifices. So whilst we walk away and we've signed the agreement, we are not saying to you it's the best agreement, but we are saying it's the best for this day. And that is why we've signed it and we've walked away from it in this way.
Mike Shingang, do you think that this agreement has meant or means that you've ceded so much ground to the employer that it will be difficult to, claw your way back, and still, be able to stand up to them in future?
Certainly correctly for you, unless if we as Labour across the unions and across the federations we unite. Because sadly, one of the lessons we have learned is that the employer came to this round of negotiations emboldened by their austerity and their neoliberal agenda for the past 5 years, but also emboldened by the fact that there come a point where we don't speak with one voice. And in this case, they've triumphed. They've triumphed because for the first time, Vuyo, in the public service, an employment sector that was supposed to have job security and a guarantee of a basic salary. Their workers are walking away with what comrades are calling 11% non-pensionable. In other words, the pension of workers today will stay stagnant. They will not go anywhere. Even those, they say, they are benefiting because they were on the personal notch. It doesn't take them to the next notch. Even those who were not supposed to, it doesn't take them to the next area in terms of their growth progression. Sadly, we have succeeded to put a freeze on the wages growth and also put a freeze on the pension of public servants. We have now the employer came to this round of negotiation with clearly that they are not going to absorb community health care workers that are busy down there on the street today, going door to door and making sure that they are screening and testing our people. Today they are performing public health care services, but they are sitting there not employed by the Department of Health. They came there, they've succeeded. They succeeded that they are not going to implement our demand that we have started demanding since 2007 of abolishing salary level 1 up to 3, because that we characterize that thing as an apartheid wage gap, the wage inequality that we're talking about here in South Africa. That's the reason why we want a sliding scale that is not in percentage, but is a rand and cent. I may have a 1,000 rand as compared to Tolopi, that is not different in terms of percentage. But when you go to a shop and buy a bread, the bread is not according to the percentage. The bread is according to the price. And therefore, my 1,000 on top of the 3,000 that I earn, and the 1,000 on top of the 7,000 that another comrade earns, is not going to equate into a sliding scale when we go to the consumer that we're supposed to buy. So that's what we're working away from. Our view is that unless we come back and claw back, it will be very difficult to force to think that the employer is going to listen to workers in future and implement and honor all its agreements. It will be very difficult if indeed we're going to refer to the state as an employer of choice and an ideal employer. All of us are going to be plunged into a precarious area like we see in other private sector. We were not here to come and debate with Bezel or Comrade Tolopi in terms of why did they sign or not. We are here to explain as how why we think this is a West agreement, just like others would have thought that the agreement is the West. In fact, as my last point, you asked me a question about finding friends and comrades outside the Federation. If you remember in 2018, Nehau was the last union to sign the agreement that the government has since reneged on it. Our calculation at that point was that, in fact, we're going to have a problem if we're going to find ourselves and find friends somewhere else to help us to fight rather than our traditional allies. This is a sad moment indeed, but we congratulate, I think we must say so, those unions who have been able to secure something for their members. Sadly, as Nehau, we can't say that the majority of the constituents that we represent can say we're in a position to can secure something for them this time around.
Quick last word from you, Mr. Tolopi.
No, we appreciate the fact that there are unions that did not sign. We respect that they are independent unions and they got a mandate from their members that they must not sign. Similarly, we expect from those who did not sign to also appreciate the fact that those who signed got mandates from their members and therefore they signed and should be respected for decisions that they took mandated by their members. Secondly, in terms of our focus was about disposable income, hard cash into the pockets of the members. It is true, Vuyo, that we secured much more than what we demanded for the low-earning officials. If we would have stuck to our 7%, many of the lowest-earning officials would not have received 1,000 rand. They would have received 7%, which was our demand, which would have translated to something between 400 rand up to 700 rand, which means what we secured for them this time, the lowest earning officials, is much more, both in rand terms and also in percentage terms. Secondly, around the issue of pension. For us in the public service, the pension is a defined benefit. It's guaranteed for all public servants. The formula that is used to calculate your pension when you go on pension on 60 will still be the same based on the number of years you provided service to state and then your last salary you earn there. So there's nothing that will disadvantage the public servants for not contributing like that. So I'm saying, yes, indeed, we did not get what we wanted. It's not the best deal, but this is not the beginning and the end. It's a process. Negotiations is a process. Fighting to improve conditions won't end now. They will continue. In August, we'll be at the Constitutional Court fighting to secure the last leg of 2018, and we'll continue negotiating for better deals. Unity of the workers is very, very important. And that's what we must prioritize. Thank you.
And that's where we're going to end it. Thanks to all three of you, Basil Manuel from Naptosa, Mike Shingange from Nahau, and Kosana Dolopi from SATU. Up next, we'll look at the implications of the cyber attack that has hit Transnet, throwing the country's ports into disarray and bringing business to a halt. Could it have been prevented? That's coming up in a moment. Well, a cyber attack has hit Transnet, throwing the country's ports into disarray and bringing business to a halt. Question many people are asking is whether something like this could have been prevented. We're now joined on the line by Mamela Lutuli, who is a specialist in this area. She is with a company called Take Note IT. Mamela, thanks very much for talking to us this evening. Just looking at the sheer scale of this and how it has basically brought everything to a halt. For a company like Transnet, is this something, that you would have expected?
Oh, definitely no. A lot could have been done. It could have been prevented. Proactive strategies in dealing with cyber attacks is the only way, because the hackers are working 24/7 and they are becoming sophisticated day by day. So a big organization like Transnet, from my point of view, they would have done better. Proactive measures should have been in place. They're supposed to be having a security operational center that is monitoring their environment 24/7, that is hunting the threats proactively. So I believe if they had the software that is proactively hunting the threats in their environment, they would have managed to identify it and be able to detect it and quarantine that machine that has been affected before it spreads to the whole environment and bring their system into halt.
And that you're saying is how companies operate. It's like normal, standard procedure. That is, you do this routinely even before you are attacked.
Absolutely.
But then, this is huge. You're talking here about goods that come into the country or that leave the country. Yes, there's no evidence. I'm not saying here like things have now been stolen or have disappeared. Everything is still there. But the fact of the matter is that those goods simply cannot move. Now, how does Transnet, get? Okay, maybe I should start first by asking, what do you think would have been the impact of this on Transnet's customer base?
I'll talk from my point of view. I'm not working for Transnet, but the operational risk is beyond. Like, we all know that their systems are not functioning. So what has happened, because it's a ransomware, they've encrypted their data. All the applications have been encrypted. Only the hackers have got the key to access their environment. Just the reputational damage on its own, we can't even go there. But the operational systems are all dysfunctional. That's a huge price to pay for Transnet. And the backup systems, because it normally takes, if you've got robust backup systems, it takes you 2 to 3 days to recover. Unless you've been attacked on different layers of your application. Even still, now I've just heard now the communication they put out that they are slowly recovering, because two things you can do with ransomware. It's either you pay the ransom, which is they normally want Bitcoin. It's a big no. That is not recommended. The only way out is to recover your data. And by doing that, at least I've just heard now that they are starting to, though they are operating manually, but they are starting to get back to some of their applications live. But this could have been prevented if they were proactive enough.
I mean, there's a point in going, for automation, obviously. I mean, processing things manually now and asking people to resubmit, documentation manually and so on. I mean, it's going to clog up the system. Obviously, it's going to result in delays. Obviously, the issues of trust, in what Transnet is doing. All of that develops. How does one recover from something like this? How do you quickly regain the confidence of your clients and, be able to operate as swiftly or as close to operating swiftly as you can? What do people normally do in a situation like this, or to get out of a situation like this?
So the first thing Transnet is supposed to be doing, I'm hoping they've done that already, is to get the external expertise. That's the first thing, because this is beyond them as Transnet. Get the external expertise in place, work as a team. So it needs collective effort now. And in being collective effort, put the resilient plan in place, where now you know exactly that the backup systems are in place. Should you experience this ransomware again, what needs to be done? But thirdly is the social engineering process, because phishing with ransomware is phishing. So this process, these hackers have been working on Transnet for a very long time for them to be able to have managed to penetrate their system. So most importantly is education. They need to drive the campaign of educating their employees that how to handle phishing. But a detailed resilient plan for them to recover out of this thing and have a clear plan in terms of the data recovery. That needs to be in place, and they need to have the security operational center that is operating 24/7, monitoring and detecting any threat in their environment.
What makes you so sure?
What companies like Note and other companies out there are doing.
Well, what makes you so sure, though, that they can't handle it on their own? What gives you, what tells you that they can't on their own quickly recover, reorganize themselves, and do what needs to be done? You seem to have given hope that they are able by themselves to do what needs to be done.
I mean, you look on the time they've taken. This incident happened last week.
On the 22nd,
like I'm saying, the
yes.
normal turnaround time is 2 to 3 days to recover and be back to system and be up and running. With Transnet, that is not happening. So clearly, they are battling to clean this ransomware in their system. So the external hand is what can help people that are going to be dedicated in dealing with this matter 24/7.
Well, let's hope they do indeed do that for the sake of their own business, but also, of course, for the sake of those that depend on them to do business. Thank you very much for your time this evening, Mamela Lutuli, of course, who is an IT and cyberspace security specialist. And that's where we're going to leave it this evening. To join us again tomorrow evening. For now, it's a goodbye from me and the rest of the Watchdog crew.